So tell me about CoCharger. How did it start?
It's the solving my own problem first thing. I got my first EV. A neighbour about a mile over that way convinced me to try his car, and it was lovely. So I ordered it, and it arrived with a note saying your home charger will be another 6 weeks. And back then, there wasn't a lot of option. So I had a car I couldn't really run. Now it'd be a lot easier. And the arrangement was I went back to said neighbour and said, well, it's your fault. And we just had an arrangement where I would drop it off at his house once a week on the way home from work and walk home, plug it in, walk home. And then next morning, walk over, unplug it, drive off, stick a £5 note through his door, which was sort of all right for 6 weeks. But after that, all the arrangements and who remembers what and leaving the space for the charger and is £5 the right amount and all the rest of it, that soon got wearing. So he thought, we need an app for that. And so he developed this app that does the sort of the matchmaking, if you like. So he signs up as a host, I sign up as a chargee. That helps me find the host and say, can I have every Tuesday night for the coming year, please, or however long you want to book? And it sends reminders and so on. And it also allows the host to set up the bank account to get paid, very important, and for the chargee to set up a payment card. And then you just set up your bookings, you turn up, you start the session in the app, go home, go to work, whatever you're doing. The important thing is you can leave the car for far longer than the battery will take to charge. So overnight is the most common. And then at the end of it, the app works out, okay, this is this much money. You're paying for just the amount of time the charger was running. And it's very important that you're paying to rent a charger, not just paying for electricity. And it takes the payment from the chargee, and it takes off the fee for running CoCharger, and the rest goes onto the host's account. So it's really nice and simple. And it's just built up around that community charging model.
Tell me more about the costing. So if I were to sign up as a host, I can never make sense of my electricity bill.
Nah, quite. It's open to the host to set a rate, and they set two numbers. One is the minimum amount for a session, because there is, below a certain amount, even though it's usually a regular weekly thing, or sometimes more often, there's a minimum amount. But then you set an amount which is how much per hour that my charger is running. And it's important that it does that rather than just electricity, because you're paying for the charger, the tarmac and the electricity really, and the service of having it there. And generally the vast majority go for that sort of average around, I think it's moving up now because people's electricity bills are going up. But really, the chargee hasn't had to buy a charger. They're getting all the benefits of having a charger at home, just a longer walk to their front door. So the host sets that rate and they can adjust it anytime they want. And it's deliberately simple. We don't want some sort of really complicated thing where you're not sure what you're going to pay.
Yeah.
After all, the whole point of this is providing that chargee, before they've even bought an EV, with a way of knowing, I can run it now. I can take it to that neighbour every Tuesday night or whatever, and I know it'll be available, and I know it's nice and cheap. And that's what matters. Simple, affordable, dependable.
Is there lots of support in terms of pricing, in terms of, do you have support?
Do we have support?
Yes,
well, this is the nice thing about charge point sharing.
Question and answers.
Yeah, so the nice thing about charge point sharing is everyone has got a live-in, on-site engineer and customer services rep with an interest in making sure it's working, which is lovely. And generally, EV people are helpful people. They want to make sure everybody's okay. Generally, there are platforms. We're the only purpose-built community charging one, and it's built all around that neighbourhood model, but there are others where you can share your charger for people who are away from home. Do all of it. It all helps. So loads of support, yeah.
So tell me about the psychology of it. Who are you really aiming for and why?
Well, the mission is to reduce emissions. People who are already in EVs, all respect to us, but we're not a problem anymore. So this is really aimed at the motorist who is thinking of going to an EV. They've got past the cost thing and realised actually it might be a lot cheaper. They've realised the range isn't really the problem people make it out to be. But then you get to that final moment and you realise, well, hang on, all these advantages that my friend who has an EV in a driveway with a charger in it gets, I'm in a flat or a terrace, how do I get those? And we know that's a massive, massive blocker. There's a reason why the vast majority of EVs are currently going to homes that can have chargers in. And it's not just whether you have a driveway, is it rented? Have you got the right electricity supply? Is the driveway in the right place? There's all sorts of numbers. We just work to half. It's about half of us can't have chargers at home. And it's all about helping to remove that last barrier for them, because we know they've got to the rest. We know most people want to plug on their car now. It's wonderful. It's for those people to say, look, no driveway, no problem. Just use this. It's one of the ways you can run an EV if you don't have a charger at home. So that's what we're aiming to do. Just help people get into an EV regardless of where they live.
So how long have you been going and what kind of response have you had?
Well, the idea is all of 2.5 years old. And we started developing 2 weeks before the first lockdown. Fantastic. Really only started building it at the end of 2020. And I remember just over a year ago, we were celebrating our first 1,000 signed users. It went very quickly. Yeah, we obviously hit the right spot. We just went past 7,500 and it's accelerating. And also we're seeing the actual usage figures that just pick up more and more and more. It's sort of like 20% month on month. It's huge growth now. So it seems we were right in what we thought the need was. The strategy was always, be the best at one thing that matters. So we're not trying to do all these different use cases. It's just, here's a neighbour who can't have a charger. Here's a neighbour who can use that charger. And that's working really, really well. So yeah.
Have you had any particularly nice stories?
I've had lots actually. There's a very good video just been done from a charging pair up in the Midlands, I think, where the lovely thing was unprompted. The guy said, oh, this is my neighbour and I charge on her driveway once a week. And he just said, I was always keen to get an EV, but it was CoCharger that tipped the balance. And that's the sort of champagne moment. It's like, yes, that's one fossil fuel car that is no longer being used.
There are still naysayers when it comes to EV. In terms of environmental benefits.
Yes.
Talk me through some of that.
It's complicated because sometimes there's that grain of truth and they hang on that. We know this isn't just conspiracy theories, there are big organisations paid lots of money to exaggerate, shall we say, or spread some of this, and you're up against huge budgets on misinformation. That picture of what it said, a lithium mine, that turned out to be a 1970s picture of a copper mine. That didn't create itself, and we're up against that kind of thing. But concerns over ethical sourcing of materials, especially cobalt, there's some truth in that. If you step back, you realise this is an EV problem. That mobile phone has got lithium in it. It's that laptop, all of that, and also mining in general. There are lots and lots of ways of mining lithium, for instance. It's one of the most common things in the Earth's crust. There are some that are very low impact, but are they the cheapest? There's all these things that are quite right. It is frustrating when you see reports, I don't know if you heard of Aston Gate, but that was one of them, reports that try to exaggerate the carbon footprint of an EV compared to a fossil fuel car. And what they tend to do, and they've come from various sources, is ignore some of the things like the cost of, the environmental cost of making fuel and getting it to you is probably higher than the cost of when you burn it. They ignore that. And then they assume that your car was built in a factory powered by coal and that all the electricity you put in it came from coal and things like this, and they just make it as bad as possible. Whereas actually, no, it is an absolute slam dunk that EVs are a good thing, because even if you are that impossible person who bought a coal-fired, factory car and runs it on coal and whatever it is, over the life of the car it's still better. And the difference is there's no such thing as sustainable fossil fuel. Whereas I can change the power supply into that factory. I can change what generates the electricity in your plug. So that's what we're up against. The poor public is so misinformed now. It is deliberately so complicated. And yet the number one thing you hear from people who've made the switch to a full EV is, oh, that's easy. It's a mobile phone with wheels. Suddenly it all makes sense. I didn't need to know about all these options and complexities and stuff. I just plug it in and go about my life.